You guys might see my cats popping in and out of the background too. I feel like we're all kind of used to that with work from home and stuff, but she is literally like right there.
I love the cats. I'm obsessed. They're so cute.
Oh, I'm glad that you like them. They tend to be they steal the spotlight a lot.
All right, well, we will go ahead and get started and folks can continue to join. It is the end of the semester here, so people are really coming down to the wire, but this session will be recorded and posted on our website so that everyone can view it in their own time. So good afternoon and welcome to everyone who is able to join us today. My name is Emily Sears and I am the Civic Engagement Fellow for Queen's University of Charlotte. Thank you for joining us for our final installment of the Spring 2021 Lunch and Learn series. Before we begin, I wanted to offer a sincere thank you to everyone who has joined these events or been part of our work over the last year and a half. When I started this position in January of 2020, I never imagined the impact that this role would have on my life. I can truly, it's difficult to express how deeply grateful I am to have served Queens, Charlotte, and our national community during a very turbulent time for all of us. When I graduate from Queens in only a few short weeks, I know that the lessons I learned and the wonderful people I met and the positive impacts that we all had on our communities through the use of nonpartisan engagement will stay with me long after I leave this beautiful campus. So once again, thank you all for being here and spending your Tuesday afternoons with us as we all have the chance to hear from experts about the topics that are most important to all of us. And without further ado, as always, if you have questions during the presentation, please post them in the chat box and I will relay them in our Q&A section. Today, I am very honored to welcome Callie Pruett to our Lunch and Learn event. I should also note that Callie and I are from the same county in Western North Carolina and went to rival high schools, but we'll try to keep things civil during this presentation. We won't get into high school rivalries. But welcome, Callie. Callie Pruett is the Senior Strategist for Grassroots Advocacy at the American Physical Society, which is the largest professional organization and academic journal for physicists in the US, publishing the last full decade of Nobel Prize-winning articles in physics. Before APS, Callie was a campaign professional working at the highest levels of congressional and gubernatorial campaigns throughout the American South. Callie has a degree in the sociology of social inequality from Appalachian State University, and her graduate work is in human rights at Southern Methodist University. In her spare time, Callie is a passionate advocate for the Appalachian region, a mom to special needs pets, and serves on the leadership team of the new Moral Majority PAC. Callie appears today in her professional capacity, or Callie appears in her personal capacity today, and the views expressed in her presentation are her own. Welcome, Callie, and I will now turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Emily, and welcome everyone. I am so excited to be here. Emily and I were connected, in a very strange way, and found out that we were very similar. We kind of connected through a mutual friend, a professional friend, and then we realized we were from the same county, from the same town. Our dads know each other, so it was very fortuitous for us to meet. And I'm excited to be here today. This is one of the things I'm most passionate about in my work, is just getting to talk to people about what matters to them. So if you're comfortable, I ask you to turn on your cameras. Let's make this kind of a seminar. Let's talk. I want to learn about you. I want to learn about what you're passionate about, and I want to help you get to a place where you feel comfortable to advocate and you feel prepared to do that. And that's what I am hoping to get to in this session today. So I will share my screen and we will kind of go into what I have prepared for us today. All right, so Emily very aptly named this this seminar "Keeping the Momentum of Change: Organization, Lobbying, and Advocacy." And I want to talk to you about all of those things as they intertwine with each other, what they mean. Obviously, they are all connected, but how do we kind of navigate each of those? So let's see here. Okay, so I'm Callie Pruett. As Emily said, I'm a former campaign professional. I'm a registered federal lobbyist currently. I'm a science communicator, and I'm a grassroots strategist. As you can see or as you heard in my kind of resume that Emily read out to you, I am not a scientist. And I want to teach you guys that you do not have to have a degree from an Ivy League school. You do not have to have a professional, a PhD in a science organization or anything like that to be successful in your advocacy. All you need is passion, and all you need is to care about your issues and to make sure that you have the tools that you need to continue your advocacy. Let me just, okay. So first thing I want to address is, what is a lobbyist? It's a scary DC word, but I want to clear up a little bit about what that means. So there are lobbyists that are kind of these scapegoats of the media. They're scapegoats of organizations, of nonprofits. Those are what we call hired gun lobbyists. Which are a little bit different, not even a little bit, a lot different than association or nonprofit lobbyists such as myself. The reason that I am registered is because I spend 20% or more of my time actively looking at and advocating for specific pieces of legislation. So if you come to DC, you work at an organization, and all you do is educate people, or you say, you go to Congress and you say, I think we should spend more money on animal rights, I think we should spend more money on education. That's not lobbying. Lobbying is specifically asking, okay, I want you to support HR 176, and here are the reasons why. And so a lot of that comes with just time and energy spent going through these bills, looking at the problems that you're facing, what your membership is interested in or your constituency is interested in, and becoming the most aware that you can be about those and becoming an expert on them. And that's why I'm a lobbyist. I care about these issues. I care about science policy, and I want to make sure that other people know. Not everybody has hours in their day, a full work week to dive into these issues, but they still want to be aware of them. And that's what I do. I dive into these issues so that people don't have to. So that is just, I wanted to make sure that we kind of dive into that scary buzzword right at the beginning. The next thing I want to talk about is grassroots versus direct lobbying. Grassroots lobbying is my specialty. So that is making sure that an entire group of people knows about an issue and knows about a specific piece of legislation, and then goes to their Congress people to ask them to take action on that. So it's a collective movement. This is what I do. I spend all day long writing emails to our members, making sure that they're really aware of what's going on, and then asking them to either write, call, tweet, meet with their Congress people. Direct lobbying is something that professionals do, which I also do a little bit of, but since the pandemic, it's a little bit more difficult to do this kind of what they call like shoe leather lobbying, which is walking through the halls of Congress and talking to legislators directly. So direct lobbying is kind of what I do in those situations, kind of pre-pandemic, where I would go and speak to key members of Congress, just myself. You get to get into more depth. A lot of times constituents know they care about something, they know they're interested in something, but they don't necessarily know the specifics of the legislation. How much is something going to cost? What other pieces of the budget is it going to impact? What committee has it been referred to? Those are things that people just don't think about, but I think about them because it's my job too. So a lot of times I'm speaking to people on the Judiciary Committee, I'm speaking to people on House Science or Senate Science about these certain bills, and that's more direct lobbying. I would say that the main difference is kind of grassroots is very general. It's making sure that the Congress members know their constituents care about the issue, and then direct lobbying is, okay, now you know your constituents care about it. Here are the details. Here is the fine blueprint and how we want you to take action on this. So I decided to kind of break this down a little bit into not all fingers are thumbs. I don't know if you guys have ever heard that, but it says all thumbs are fingers, but not all fingers are thumbs. And so all lobbying is advocacy, but not all advocacy is lobbying. And so that's the kind of metaphor that I think of when I think of these three words. So advocacy is any action that speaks in favor of or recommends or argues for a cause. It can be on behalf of yourself. It can be on behalf of other people. It can be on behalf of the planet, other living things, or it can be on behalf of an issue or a monetary, budgetary issue. So advocacy is kind of this all-encompassing, cloud-like, nebulous thing. Organization is kind of taking that and applying it to a large group of people. So it's using your passion, your skill, not only to take action, but to get other people to take action. A lot of organization happens at these local levels with groups that are activating on either campaigns, or they're activating with the League of Women Voters, things like that. Oftentimes you can get organization from societies like the American Physical Society. So that's a lot of what I'm doing. I'm organizing people. I would say that political organizing is a little bit different than community organizing, which I know was very popularized by Barack Obama. It's very, very important, but there are kind of some differences. Community organizing is a lot more local. It's a more about kind of your city or your municipality, making sure that your community is well. Political organizing kind of ends up going to a broader level. So you get into talking to elected officials about policy in particular, and even ordinances, even at the local level, but there's kind of a difference there. One is about the health of your community and one is about specific pieces of policy. And then lobbying, again, going back to that, we've broken down the two types of lobbying, direct lobbying and grassroots, but it's basically communicating with decision makers about existing or potential legislation. So we even go in and talk about legislation that needs to happen, that doesn't even exist yet, but we can see a problem. One of these in particular at my organization is the helium crisis. Lots of people don't even know that there is a helium crisis, but helium is a non-renewable, irreplaceable resource that comes from the natural world. And we are using it at great speed. And so APS is activating to make sure that people who are studying, using it for science, get kind of a primary access to it from the Federal Helium Reserve. And you go into an office and they're like, helium? Do you mean like Party City, like balloons? Like, is that what you mean? And so a lot of this is us just coming and really teaching about an issue that legislators may not even know exists. And so we have that, and then we have existing legislation. Currently, one of those that I'm working very passionately on is the Combating Sexual Harassment in STEM Act, which is a really exciting prospect. It kind of directs federal agencies to address sexual harassment in grants, because most research in the country is federally funded at some level, basic research. And so if the federal government mandates that a grantee will lose their funding if they are proven to be a sexual harasser or an assailant, that's great for the science community. It's great for the community at large. So those are kind of the two aspects of lobbying about existing or potential legislation, and then urging them to vote for or against. Any questions at this point? I can take a couple if anyone has any. Okay. So one of the things that I always think about, and this may seem a little bit hokey to some, but Barack Obama said, we are the ones we've been waiting for. And if you're around my age, or even a little bit younger, maybe you went with your parents to vote for Barack Obama. Maybe you went with your parents to vote for John McCain. Maybe you went and you clicked the button. That's what I remember getting me really excited about politics, was my dad let me press the button for the president. And that was something that I remember to this day. And I feel like everybody has a story like that, whether it's you're interested, you had an experience with with a teacher, and you feel very passionate about teachers getting higher salaries, that they benefited your life, so you want to advocate for them, and you remember one specific instance. And I think that those stories, the storytelling, is what really impacts legislators. And so I think that this quote from Barack Obama is really impactful, because we are the ones we've been waiting for. We are constantly saying, they need to hear about this. Congress should know about this. But we are those people that can make that happen. And we all have a story to tell. That's often one that I tell at the beginning, kind of an icebreaker in offices. They say, how'd you get involved in this work? You're not a scientist. I tell them about that voting booth, and I tell them that my brother's a physicist, and that's what made me interested in getting involved in science policy, even though I could never do the math on my own. I can at least be a science communicator and break that down. So I encourage you to start thinking about, what stories do you have that could really make an impact beyond numbers, beyond any sort of stats or figures that they'll forget long after you've left. But they'll remember you, and they'll remember the stories you tell, and the person that you were. So that's kind of where I would love to start this discussion. So what do I care about? And how do I get other people to care about it too? That's the big question in advocacy. That is what everyone is constantly struggling with in my industry. We have entire conferences about how do we get people to care about these issues that we care about. I've kind of broken it down into a little bit of a practical guide to helping you dive into advocacy. So the first thing that I would love to talk to you guys about is thinking about your why. I think this is so important. Why are you interested in the issues that you are interested in? People respond to authenticity. They respond to your passion. They want to hear more when you speak about why it's worth your time. People are more easily ready to spend their time on it, because if there's an issue that's out there in the atmosphere somewhere, but nobody's really talking about it, then nobody thinks it's worth their time. So this is what you kind of have to prove. And I would love to kind of break here, and I will see if I can stop sharing my screen really quickly. And we can just maybe talk about your whys. What are you interested in? What are you wanting to advocate for? And what is your why?
I think for me, it's more about the teachers' pay. I think the teachers need to be paid more, and they need to be, especially grade school teachers. And I think they also need to be able to have access to like supplies that they need, rather than taking money out of their own pocket to do it.
Yeah, that's a great issue to want to be involved in. Is there something in your life that sparked that? A lot of people had a wonderful teacher. A lot of people have relatives that are teachers. Is there something that initially made you interested in advocating for teachers?
I think it's just growing up and having different teachers in grade school, seeing how big the classes are that they have to deal with, and a lot of other things. And plus, one of my best friends is an actual teacher. So
that's great. That's what kind of, when you're teasing out your advocacy, that's where I would start. Say, I have a friend who is a teacher. They're struggling. They need help. I've spoken to them. I have seen it firsthand. And that's kind of a great seed to start a conversation when you're advocating. Anyone else? What are your interests, and what is your why?
Hi, Callie. My name is Angie Edwards, and I'm the Director of International Education at Queens. And so international education is really my passion, because it transformed my life, and I work with students every day whose lives is transforming. So that's kind of where my passion comes from. And I was telling Jen Martz, I'm actually getting ready to participate in an advocacy day that our professional association organizes. So this is very timely for me. I'm really excited about this. And it's great to hear you talk about how the anecdotes and the stories are so powerful, and you don't have to know all the stats necessarily, but to be able to.
It's so I have been on the other side of that table. I know how I guess, intimidating that it can be to walk into these offices, or even if you go in and you get like a very freshly out of college, new staffer who may not know really about your issue, a lot of what they're going to remember and pass on is the story you tell. So I would love to hear, how did international education change your life? Like that, since that's your why, I think that would be a really wonderful place to start.
Well, I'd say it's evolved over the years. I mean, from the first time I had my own international experience, it started with a short experience in high school and then a year abroad between undergrad and grad school. And then now that I work in international education, I would say it continues to shape and evolve who I am, but it's really mostly about my worldview and how I look at events that happen globally and how they affect us locally, and understanding and really valuing those connections more and more the older I get, and seeing the importance of it, and how decisions that we make, as citizens, everything from state and local elections that we participate in and how we cast our votes really can have a much broader impact. And I think it's just become clearer and clearer as the older I get, and the more time I have to reflect on things. And so I know how critical that is. And I believe it's really critical for us to engage students when they're in college with these issues and give them those opportunities at an early age, because not everybody has those opportunities. Anyway.
No, so that I think is a really wonderful pitch. Anything that you can tie to your personal story will break the ice. You can even ask folks, were you able to study abroad? A lot of people in these offices don't get asked about themselves a lot. It's strange. Like, people come in wanting something from these offices. And so even the slightest bit of tell me about yourself can make your meeting really, really memorable. It can make a difference in how they communicate with you. I mean, they're going in there all day long. These staffers are taking meetings. People come in, they hand them a one-pager. They basically just read the one-pager to them, and then they leave. And I think that what can set a meeting apart is, instead of reading them the one-pager, leave that to them. Talk a little bit about the high points, maybe hit one or two pieces on the one-pager that you have, and then just kind of have a conversation. Talk about your experience, ask them about theirs. If you're meeting with folks from North Carolina, that's always a great thing. I always love going and meeting with Senator Tillis's staff, with Senator Burr's staff, any of the Congress people, because we just kind of have that common thread. And a lot about learning about who you're going to talk to goes into that. So if you can, in any lobby days or any advocacy that you do, if you know the person you're meeting with, just Google them. And you never really know like what you might have in common with them. There was someone that I met with that was in a Kentucky office, and my uncle was a professor at the University of Kentucky, and they were actually in one of his classes. And it was just this very random an encounter, but it kind of forged a bond that made our meeting a little bit more memorable. So that's another way to make these really great. All right, so I will go back and share my screen again, and we can keep talking. Thank you guys so much for participating. I am definitely a participatory person, so I really appreciate you guys. Okay, so next is to define your goal. I'm sure that a lot of people have heard about this method, but I think that one of the best ways to think about goals is the SMART method, which is specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound goals. And that's how you can remember that as a SMART goal. A lot of times people will come into advocacy saying, I want to change everything about this issue. And that quickly becomes extremely overwhelming. You can't solve the climate crisis by yourself. You can't solve poverty by yourself. And a lot of the things that can be difference makers are left on the table because folks aren't thinking about attainable, relevant goals. So I will again talk about another piece of legislation that we are working on for APS. So a lot of times it's difficult for international scientists to get a visa to come to the United States. It's rough process. Many times we have them sign a form, actually, that our government does, that says, I will leave the United States after I finish my studies here. And this is the opinion of APS. I share this opinion. That's bonkers. We want the best and brightest to come to the United States. So we have targeted 2 very specific provisions within a giant immigration package. We're leaving everything else out, and we're just talking to lawmakers about one particular visa and one particular issue. So there's 2 provisions. So those are specific, they are measurable, attainable, relevant, and they are time bound because they are in a current immigration package. And so when you think through the issues that you care about, you don't have to be that specific. If there's something in your community, or not that specific, you don't have to be like that kind of elevated. It doesn't have to be the most, like the smartest thing in the world. What all you have to do is say, okay, there's a pothole on my street, and I would really, really like to get that finished. I would like to get it, I would like to get it fixed by August. And I'm going to go talk to my city council person. That's a specific goal. It's attainable. It's relevant to your life. There's a pothole on your street. It's time bound. You say, okay, I'm going to try and advocate for this and get it fixed by August. And it's measurable because then you have that kind of time bound area. So I think that this kind of SMART goals can apply to big organizations like APS, but it can also apply to your life and your advocacy. I think also a great example of this in college towns, there are tons of small organizations that need grants, that need help with different pieces of organizational advocacy, ordinances. There's a lot of times where people they're trying to maybe open a new homeless shelter, and they need to do neighborhood advocacy for that. And that's something that folks can get involved in if you define your goal and you work together to make sure that it's attainable. The next thing is your cause is in a sea of causes. I do want to address outrage, burnout, and attention fatigue. They are real. So a lot of how you get people to care about your issue, again, is making sure that they know it's worth your time, and that then again, it'll be worth theirs. But everybody's trying to do that. So I say this as I also recognize that every organization out there is thinking like that. They're saying, okay, I want people to care about it. Here's why we care about it. So what you have to do is find your niche of people. So Emily knows this. I am extremely passionate about the Appalachian region. I'm very passionate about my work there. It's not my full-time job, but it is my passion in life. Not everybody cares about Appalachian poverty, and that is the fact of it. And so I have had to work very carefully, I would say, in finding my niche in that, finding my people. Who is it that will band together with me on this issue? And so that's where a lot of this kind of work in finding organizations that agree with you, finding people in your networks. I cannot stress enough that everyone who is involved in advocacy should be networking all the time, just to make sure that you're meeting new people, that you're aware of other issues going on in your community, and also that you are finding your niche. So there's definitely an element of outrage, burnout. I think a lot of folks are feeling that right now, but there are people out there. It just takes kind of digging in. A lot of that can be done on social media. That's what I've done. My primary place that I exist in social media is Instagram. And so that's where I've been able to carve out my community. Now, Instagram doesn't have to be the place that you do. Many people do it on Twitter. Many people do it at neighborhood meetings, at their HOAs, at city council meetings. Those kind of things are where you find your people. But if you have a kind of broader idea, like if your issue impacts a broad region like mine does, like the whole of Appalachia, then you kind of need to find a new way. Instead of doing the kind of shoe leather walking door to door, you need to find a different way. Where I have found that is Instagram. And there are lots of resources out there. I do want to talk about the advocacy ladder. As you speak to people or as you call on people for action, your goal should be convincing your audience to take one step, to sign one letter, to take one action that day, to get involved in one way. So imagine your advocacy as a ladder. You're trying to get people on the first rung of that ladder. Maybe the second rung of that ladder is coming to something like this. Maybe it is signing up to get emails from an organization that you care about. And then as people grow to understand the issue, they grow to care about it in the way that you do. Maybe the next rung of that ladder is taking a meeting with their congressman or calling their congressman. And then the next potential rung on the ladder is you guys organizing an event together. So those rungs take a lot of time and effort to build. I always tell folks you should never start with wanting to plan a huge event or something like that. You really have to start at the very small levels of bringing people together. And that's why you start with one action. Folks are tired, they're busy. Everybody's still working from home. I've been working from this couch for over a year. And so it's interesting to try and get people to sign up that one time, but then you can re-engage them. And so that's what I call the advocacy ladder. And it does take time to move up that ladder and to get your folks to move up that ladder. So now that we've kind of gone through the first section, I want to talk to you guys about the biggest questions in advocacy and dive into targeting. So we've talked about what you need. We've talked about the advocacy ladder. Now let's figure out your audience and how to find those people. First is who? Who is your audience? For me on Instagram, it's people who are my age. It's people who are from the same region as me. It's people who enjoy both political content and cute special needs pets. That's kind of my brand, is making sure that I'm keeping a balance between kind of just cozy content as well as really impactful, hard-hitting advocacy content. I don't focus on one issue. I do focus on a ton of issues. A lot of my posts are educational, so my audience is rather broad. When I'm at work, my audience is very, very small. It's 50,000 physicists across the world. And I am really honing in on them, on their needs, on who they are as people. Your audience may be students who want to study abroad, or it could be international students that you want to bring to your school. It could be any of those types of people. If you're engaging on teacher pay, your target audience could potentially be parents. And it could be a teachers union. And so that's kind of the first step in thinking about who your audience is. The second piece of who your audience is if you're talking to a legislator. And that's where the background research comes in so handy. If you go into a legislator's office to talk about education, let's just say broadly education, I would strongly recommend that you do a little bit of background research, find out what have they done on education before, look up bills that they may have co-sponsored, even if it's at the state level. A lot of teacher legislation is at the state level, actually. And so there's kind of those two facets. Who is your broad audience, and who is your audience when you're actually in the legislator's office? I target my message completely differently if I'm in a Democratic office as opposed to a Republican office. Neither one of them is bad. You know, we talk to everyone. I meet with everyone because as far as science goes, everyone is interested in science in some way. But if I were going to talk about the Combating Sexual Harassment in STEM Act, I would speak about it very differently in front of these two audiences. I would speak, if I were in one office, about how we must be attacking this problem. It is a global problem. We have seen that women are being left out of the workplace. They're leaving positions to avoid perpetrators, and we need to do better for women in science. If I were talking to another office, I would potentially say, this is a workforce issue. We are seeing women leaving, and if we have half of the workforce who is not fully integrated into our science industries, that's bad for the United States. That's bad for our economy. And those are two totally different approaches on the same bill. And so that's kind of where you have to target who is your audience, and you have to really talk about it in terms that they care about, because it is your issue. It is the issue that you care about, but you can't just talk about it in the way that you care about it. Does that make sense to everyone? Cool. All right, so next question is why? Why is your audience there? So if I'm talking about my personal Instagram, I think my audience is there because either they're my friends, they have seen a political post of mine, they like my dog who's in a wheelchair, they like kind of the content that I'm putting out. And it's about my personality, I think. That's how social media works. My audience is at work is there because they want the benefits of the association that they pay to be a part of. And there's nothing wrong with that. They are my constituency. So my audience at my professional work is there because they know that I am a resource for them, that I am fighting on behalf of them. And so they'll listen to me because I'm doing the research on their behalf. I'm looking at policy, looking at legislation on their behalf for their best interests, and that's what they pay for. So those are kind of different ways to look at why your audience is there. Again, this really changes when you're in a legislator's office. In that case, if you guys are constituents, your audience is there because they work for you. And that's how you can approach it. If you are meeting outside of your district where you're not a constituent, your audience is there because you said something in an email request, in a meeting request that piqued their interest. And so they're meeting with you out of interest. So those meetings you have to work a little harder. So for me as a professional, if I'm meeting with an office that I'm not a constituent of, but that I have an interest in because maybe they're on the Judiciary Committee, then that's something that I would really focus on, is saying like, okay, I'm gonna bring all of the information. This is not gonna be a personal meeting. This is going to be all about the facts. So we have to look at why your audience is there. I'm looking at time. Okay, we're good on time. How do you tailor your message to fit the needs of your audience? I think this goes hand in hand with that last one. Every single person that you meet with is going to need something different from you or want something different from you. And you're going to want something from them. Politics, unfortunately, is about transactional relationships that mutually benefit each other. There's nothing wrong with any of that. That's simply how it works. And you can build real connections with people. You can build relationships with offices and with people, but a lot of times in advocacy, you want something from each other. And so how do you tailor your message to fit the needs of your audience as well as get the outcome that you want? When is the most impactful time to make your ask? This came in to play big time last year. We basically stopped talking about science for like 3 months last year when COVID was kind of drowning all of our colleagues on the Hill. It was difficult for them to do anything. They had science staffers taking constituent calls because the need was so desperate. I think that it's necessary in all times to think about when is most impactful to make your ask. If there has been an incident in your community that's taking up a lot of time, I would move your meeting. If I were meeting currently in Minneapolis and I had seen that the Derek Chauvin trial was going on, I know that those offices are going to have other interests in mind, rightfully so. It's impacting their entire community. And so I would not take that meeting because I know that it would not be as impactful as I would want it to be. So your timing really, really does matter. Also, I would say your timing when it comes to legislation, if you know something is going to the floor, take action on it right now. Call your person and say, hey, I need to talk to you immediately about this. This is important. It's coming to the floor this month, and I really care about it. That's something that we're doing right now. There's actually a Congressional Review Act resolution on the floor in April that would potentially roll back some rollbacks of methane regulation. So it would return to Obama era methane regulation, which APS is in favor of. And so we activated our members just the other day to say we have to take action on it now because it's coming in a week. And so those are the kind of things that you want to consider when you're thinking about timing. So with all of these tools, anyone can begin their advocacy journey. You guys have so much potential, and I want to spend some time addressing your interests, talking about how I can make you the most impactful advocates for your causes. And then I will go to just jump to the last slide. You guys can follow me on Twitter, on Instagram. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. I'd be more than happy to take a private call with anyone. This, I feel like, is my service to people. I want to engage people in the process. It's something that I am so passionate about because I know the power that one person can make. I know that from one meeting we took last year, there was a bill in Congress that went through the House. And it didn't unfortunately make it through the Senate, but now we have a chance at reintroducing that bill. So one person can make such a huge difference. And so I will go ahead and stop share and we can just have a conversation.
Well, thank you so much, Callie, for all of that information. I do think it can feel very daunting to sort of be on the peripheries of, you're seeing all of these events happen and you are passionate about things, but it's breaking down that wall of saying, okay, well, how? You know, I am a big advocate for immigration issues, but that's a big, arena to try and sort of get into, and then, what specific things do I want to focus on? Because again, with immigration, you've got a range of policies to look at. And, as a political science major, that's right up my alley. But for others who maybe are in different sectors, trying to breach a political system can be very challenging. But the way that you've laid it out, it's clear that anyone can do it, and that it does take a little bit of time, take some research, but at the end of the day, we all have the capacity as residents of this state and nation and world to speak up and to use our capacity as storytellers, which is a big thing here at Queens, and we love being able to share stories. So one question that I do want to pose to you and sort of kick this conversation off with, one element of the work that you do is speaking with people across the aisle, and maybe folks who don't always agree with you, or maybe you're in situations where you're lobbying for something and it's not going well, and it might, rub someone the wrong way, and they may not be as responsive to you. So, and that happens a lot on social media. We see people sort of getting into these conversations and not really navigating them in, I would say, the most respectful manner. So, do you have an example of maybe something that you've lobbied for and it hasn't necessarily gone off so well with particular people, and how did you end up navigating that?
Yeah. I will start off by saying, since I'm here in my personal capacity, I'm totally comfortable talking about where I am because I work with people who are not at the same political spectrum as me all the time. I worked on Democratic campaigns. That's where my personal views tend to lie. But I took a meeting on climate change with Senator McConnell's office last March. And it was a really productive meeting. I think that what you have to do is go in with confidence, knowing that they've accepted the meeting already. No office is going to just meet with you without knowing what they're walking into. They're going to say, who do you want to, which staffer do you want to meet with? Why do you want to meet with them, and on what issue? And so you have to go in knowing that they're not going to agree with you, but knowing that you want to get the information across, because you never know what's going to resonate with someone. There are climate change issues that the oil and gas industry agrees with APS on. There's something we're working on right now, which is methane flaring, that we have statements from Shell and BP and Exxon that they're in agreement with us on them. And sometimes those offices just don't know that information. So that's what kind of goes into your research process, is what can I bring to this meeting that maybe they haven't heard before? What can I bring to this that's, in my personal experience, something they might care about? And so for me, I actually love those meetings. I love meeting with people who don't agree with me because not only does it sharpen me as an advocate, it also allows them to see that different perspective. Many organizations and many people refuse to even talk to people across the aisle. For me, I find that really troubling. Part of what I think made me an effective political operative when I was working on campaigns was that I was also speaking to folks who were not in agreement with me. I was speaking to constituents who were never going to vote for me, but that they were going to, were my candidate, but they were going to talk to us about what they cared about. And that's how you become a better community service person. That's how you become a better advocate, is learning about those things. So I highly encourage everyone to meet with the people that they really disagree with, because oftentimes you do find some common ground. You do find something that you can even have that connection with them, because so the person that I met with in Senator Hawley's office, who would be drastically different than me, we had just like a connection on a staff person level, and I feel comfortable emailing them about an issue, even though I know their boss is not going to sign on to this piece of legislation. I'm keeping it on the table. And that's really important, because once you leave the table, then folks stop listening to your issues. But if you're there, if you're saying, hey, even if it's a little bit annoying, like, hey, I'm still here, I really want to talk to you about this issue, it can benefit you, it can benefit your cause, and it can really help bridge those divides.
Callie, you mentioned doing your research, like doing your homework beforehand. Are there any particular resources that you find are good for tracking or I don't know, maybe quickly accessing where your representatives and senators stand on certain issues or how they voted in the past?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I use a paid service through Politico, but before then, like, campaigns have no money, so like I couldn't afford any of that. But I used Ballotpedia is really good. Congress.gov, even though it's a little bit harder to navigate, like, it's not the most user-friendly site, but they can break down some of the issues. I even say, I used to use like the Wayback Machine, which is like where they kind of archive the internet, and I would look at the website of the person that I was going to talk to from like 2 years ago. So I looked at like where they were on education 2 years ago versus now. And then I also look at platforms. So one of the things that has been helping me through the immigration bill that we're working on is that we are talking to Republican offices, and it's in the Republican Party platform that they're for high-skilled immigration. And so I take that, they're like, oh, well, I don't know if we can really do this. And I was like, hey, like, this is in your platform. So just like coming equipped with like knowing what they have said they want, and like saying, this is actually what you want. That's actually what I did to get my job. They were looking for someone with a PhD in physics. And I said, you don't need someone with a PhD in physics. You need a political communicator. You need someone who can not go to Congress and spout all of the facts and all of the figures. You need someone who can talk to them in terms that they understand, because a lot of times you're talking to people who are young, who maybe haven't worked on the issue for a long time. So you can go in educating them in that way if you've read up on their platform, if you've read up on where they've stood in the past. But Ballotpedia and Congress.gov is where I would start on those. And then you can look at their committee, if you really want to get into the weeds, looking at their committee assignments and what the committees have been working on is something that's really interesting too. Because a lot of times the hard work of Congress happens in those committees and happens in what they're doing on those committees.
Thank you.
Yeah. I also will just note for you guys, if you do engage with lawmakers on social media, I just want to give you a heads up on something that every time I give one of these presentations, people are stunned by this fact. And so I like to pass it along because I also do a training on social media, which maybe I can come back next year and do that for you. So every member of Congress has 2 Twitter accounts. One is their professional Twitter account where they put out statements. It's where they make official office, like announcements, those kind of things. So if you're interested in a piece of legislation, that's where you need to go. The second account that they have is a campaign account in which they talk about issues that's a little bit more bombastic. They have their staff running that. And that's where you would go to talk about campaign issues. And one thing that people do not know is that those two, the campaign and the office, cannot communicate legally. So when I was working for a candidate and we, wanted to talk about a certain issue, or that even a constituent said, like, where does the office stand on this issue? We can't even talk to the office staff. All we would have to do is say, like, sorry, like, we don't really know. You need to go talk to the senators, their actual staff. So make sure that when you talk to them on social media that you're tagging the right account. So one is legislation and one is campaign issues. Any other questions? Anybody want to share what they're passionate about?
So I run a center at Queens, and we work on affordable housing. Like, so we do where the interest is. So every year we do our agenda 2021. So our agenda 2021, our big ones are restorative justice. We're pushing for restorative justice on a county level. There's a proposal, and we have a hearing on May 12th, and in June, the budget will be set. So there's a county commissioner proposal. So restorative justice is really big, and healthcare justice is working with restorative justice for this moment on this campaign. But we also have disability justice, affordable housing, environmental justice. We have this issue in our city where we have a crescent and a wedge.
Yeah.
So the wedge is all the wealth and the crescent's all the poverty, and every issue. So tomorrow night we're having an environmental issues based on the crescent and wedge, but everything, affordable housing, healthcare, race, everything is connected to it.
Wow, that's really, really interesting. Do you guys have a social media for like an outreach for that?
So that's where we, like you said, you're coming back next year on social media. I need social media help now. And I need we're just trying to get an intern for the summer, we did the startup 5 years ago, and Jen was just on, we're doing a new strategy for the next 5 years for our center to figure out where we go and how we're deep rooted on campus. So yeah, we're not where we need to be, but I built in a week, I have a coalition of 12 organizations that have signed on. And, I'm clergy. I've been in the city 22 years doing this. So I've got like all the networks and to do the work.
We need to talk later because the new moral majority that Emily mentioned in the beginning is the PAC that I'm involved in, and they do a lot of restorative justice things. And it's the new moral majority is kind of like a flip, so it's mostly clergy that are in this. So it's
and I'm clergy, yeah.
So you might be very interested in their work, and they are very active in North Carolina. So that's where most of our leadership team is, North Carolina and Kentucky. And so that could be really interesting. But what I'm thinking is I'm seeing, and just for everyone's information, I am from North Carolina, so I keep track of North Carolina politics and what's going on the ground. And I'm seeing a ton of political mobilization through social media in Raleigh and Charlotte. And so it's stuff that I've never seen before. People are mobilizing by sharing posts. They're mobilizing by making sure that they're kind of not in a public way. Because I think that a lot of these folks feel uncomfortable putting this on a website, but they're comfortable sharing it privately with their friends because they're afraid of violence, counter protests, and so it's less public, which I've seen. The shift in that is really interesting to me. I want a sociologist to look at it because I think it's really interesting. A lot of times beforehand, we had seen political mobilization happening by making announcements or press conferences or things like that, whereas now we're seeing kind of a lot of underground, word of mouth organization in North Carolina, which I find to be really interesting. And I do think that it's a product of the counter protests in Charlotte and Raleigh, where they've started to not be as public.
Yeah, and restorative justice for us is not, it's based on the crimes against the Black community, right? So it's not criminal justice. It's like, there was historic crime against it. So we have like seeking apology, truth telling, restorative measures, and systemic change is sort of how we move. Anyway, I sent you the blog I'm working on just for this campaign and my contact. So I'd love to talk to you more.
Yeah, fantastic. I'm saving your contact right now. I would love to get in touch because this work sounds really interesting, and it definitely sounds like something that I could at least, help maybe in some way on an advisory level. So that's really awesome. Anybody else want to talk about their advocacy and maybe just, put it out there for the world and chat about it? Emily, I know you're interested in a lot of things.
Yeah, I mean, I was hoping that, we have a couple of other people would jump in, but, I'm just now sort of working on, how I show up on social media. And like your work is phenomenal. And even Ryan and I, Ryan Carter, who's my old boss from Habitat for Humanity, we would talk a lot about, the way that you are able to concisely tell people about some of the most complex policy issues in a manner that is digestible, but also, you do it in less than 10 slides, which is mind-boggling to me. But I guess, even though we don't have time to get all into the social media aspects of it, in what ways do you find that social media, is that connection? Because a lot of us will probably never be lobbyists and will never work in that arena in an official capacity. And yet we still have the opportunity as individuals to do that work and to influence others through the collection of information, because not only do we become educated about it, but we can share it in a digestible way that is still really popular and influential. So how do you go about, sort of crafting that and thinking about, your audience? You talked a little bit about it before, but just in the ways that you approach things, because I often find that your information is not partisan, which is, the work that we do here. It's all nonpartisan in my position, and yet it's still a call to action almost.
That's a really, really great question. And I think it's a good note to end on. First of all, I will say not everybody's going to be a lobbyist, but everybody could be. You don't have to be an expert to be a lobbyist. You don't have to sell out to be a lobbyist. So I will say that. And as far as breaking down information, what I think trips people up the most is that they want to share information about the issues they care about, that they know a lot about, and that they can't stop writing about. I could write an entire novel about how I feel about Appalachia, but it's coming to a comfortable place of leaving some things out, because you can't convey everything in 10 slides. You have to take little bite-sized pieces. And so I think that that's part of why, physicists need the training to do storytelling. They need the training to connect on a personal level, because they're not comfortable leaving out details. And I think that to be an effective political communicator, to engage people in your issue as a first rung on your ladder, you have to be comfortable giving just the baseline, giving just the first talking points. Because then, once people get, they take that bite, then you can get them to take another bite, and then you can keep conveying that information. So I'm not advocating that we leave things out and that we don't tell people the whole truth, because that is not what I'm advocating for. What I think we should be doing and what we should be comfortable with is moderation, and making sure that even though we want to tell everybody everything. If you're passionate about something, that's what you want to do. And so what I would just say is, if you're creating these kind of decks, if you're creating this message that you want, to just make sure that you're comfortable with making that people don't know everything, and that you might have to tell them again. So that's kind of what I think about when I make my decks, is just like, what's the minimum that still gets my point across.
Absolutely, and thank you so much for ending on that note. And thank you all for joining us today for our last Lunch and Learn event of the semester. And thank you especially to Callie for sharing your wisdom, expertise, and advice with us. If you all are interested in hearing more about our future events or other work being done at the Wells Fargo Center for Community Engagement, please follow us on Instagram at @QU_votes. And Callie is putting all of her info in the chat again. So if you all want to follow up with her, I know that she'd be more than happy to do that.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you guys so much for listening. Emily, thank you for inviting me. And I really appreciate your time, your advocacy, and your community service. It's really awesome.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.